Good morning and welcome to Bridge Elections FAQ. It's the day before the election. I'm Isabel Lohman, the education reporter at Bridge, Michigan. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan news outlet, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. We've done this show for the last 5 months to answer your questions about the 2024 election, and we're not stopping just yet. We've been through a lot together: Joe Biden dropping out, the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, VP picks, the party conventions, the state August primary, the list goes on. Election day is tomorrow, and we've still got plenty of questions to answer. Today, we have Lauren Gibbons, Simon Schuster, and Mike Wilkinson here. They spent the last several months talking to voters, covering rallies, and digging deep into campaign finance. If you have a question for them, you can drop it in the chat now, and we'll do our best to answer those live right now. You can also visit our website for more election questions, candidate profiles, and everything else. And we're also going to have a special show on Wednesday, the day after the election, to answer more questions as well as break down the latest news from the election. As of this morning, about 3.2 million ballots have been turned in via absentee or early voting. Both candidates were in the state this weekend, and we have more visits from the campaigns today. Simon, you were at these rallies this weekend. What'd you learn?
Yeah, so Donald Trump was first here on Friday night in Warren, a place where he had just rallied just 5 weeks earlier. And we're firmly now in the closing arguments phase of this presidential campaign. And what was striking to me in that particular address is just how much it was not a closing argument. And usually you'll hear from candidates some sort of pivot, a pivot towards the broad themes of the race. And you did hear that to some extent from Donald Trump, but really it wasn't the sort of generalizations that you would get in a traditional rally speech. He's really stuck consistently to his message for this campaign throughout his presidential campaign now, which is nearly 2 years long. And this was really a rally that was targeted at his base, making sure that you're driving these initial voters out. Similarly, Kamala Harris last Monday was in Ann Arbor, and then on Sunday was in East Lansing, targeting these college students very directly. And hers had a little bit more of a traditional pivot towards a closing argument from candidates. She was speaking in broad terms about the state of the country, targeting these young voters who she really wants to be able to make sure that they drive out on election day as we reach the end of the early voting period here. And one of the things that was really striking to me in that address is that she didn't mention the name of Donald Trump even once. And so we have reporting from someone within the campaign who said that this is intentional on her part, that she wants to sort of close positive, almost mirror her running mate Joe Biden's message of sort of talking about bringing Americans together, healing the soul of the country, and then contrasting that with Donald Trump's rhetoric, which is a little bit more divisive, a little bit more doom and gloom. And so really trying to set a tonal contrast there. But whether that's going to result in electoral success, I think really remains to be seen.
Sure, and you mentioned one key voting bloc, young voters, both at East Lansing and University of Michigan. You wrote about other key voting blocs last week that Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are trying to court. What did you find in that?
That's right. I think if you've been paying attention to the presidential race as well, you know that this is a very close one, right? And one of the benefits here is that when it's such a close race, every vote matters. And so we're seeing a lot of constituencies, individual communities that may have not had a lot of attention paid to them in the past, get a lot more attention. In this story, I talk about Donald Trump's efforts to make inroads, particularly with young Black male voters. He's had multiple stops in the city of Detroit. He's spent time in Flint as well. And then also looking at peeling off some Arab Americans, sort of making the case, as he did last Friday in Warren with a stop in Dearborn, that he can bring peace to the Middle East and this more year-long conflict between Israel and Lebanon and the Gaza Strip more quickly than Kamala Harris could. And so at the same time, he's also looking to peel away some more union workers from traditionally a reliably Democratic group that has drifted towards him in the Trump era. But at the same time, Kamala Harris is going after some of these Republicans who, after 8 years of Donald Trump being a very consistent, unavoidable presence in the American political stage, are really looking to move on. They're sort of sick of him and hoping that they can, sort of quietly move some of these folks away as well. So it's an interesting you see these candidates sort of working at cross purposes at times. They're going after different each other's constituencies rather than trying to drive out their base as much as we've seen in past elections, which is really how Donald Trump won the White House in 2016, was appealing to his base and driving those folks out. But now we see them engaging in much more traditional political tactics.
Sure, and I think that shows the distinction between 2016 and 2024 and just how close this race is expected to be in this state. Mike, the election occurs tomorrow, as we all know, and when that's all over, the campaigns will have visited Michigan over 65 times. What areas of the state should we keep a close eye on?
Well, I mean, the biggest driver obviously is going to be Metro Detroit, because that's where 49% of both the people and the voters are. So they're really been targeting those areas, but they're not just going to Detroit. They've been going to the suburbs. Trump has gone to Macomb County. Joe Biden went to Warren. They're in Oakland County, Western Wayne, and Washtenaw. But what I'm really fascinated by is that there were 50 municipalities, townships, and cities that voted for Trump in 2016 and then voted for Biden in 2020. And it's, they're small places. They're Leland Township in Leelanau. They're Tecumseh City in Lenawee. They're Midland. They're in Texas Township, which is just outside of Kalamazoo. And when I looked into it a little bit, almost all of these places were heavily higher educated places. And you see that the shoreline area in Northwest Michigan, places that all went for Trump, but, from Emmett, Antrim, Benzie, Grand Traverse counties, they all moved to the left. And we don't know, the gender of who votes on election day, but I suspect that a lot of this is women. I think a lot of it is educated men and women. So one thing I will be looking at will be those areas. Another one will be Oakland County. In 2016, it gave Hillary Clinton a 54,000 vote margin. That doubled in 2020. In Detroit, which overwhelmingly supported both Clinton and Biden, the margin didn't change at all. So the movement was in these suburban areas, Western Wayne County, Washtenaw, and Oakland. And I'll be really intrigued to see if Harris is able to expand that margin in Oakland County. Gretchen Whitmer won it by 145,000 votes in 2022. If she does, maybe the Harris can endure some of the losses she might find in Detroit and other places. But it's going to be fascinating either way.
Well, and that's why we have you, right? So you can crunch the numbers as they come in and continue to do them. Lauren, we've talked a lot about the presidential race up to this point, but in Michigan, Republicans have the chance to flip the state house, which would end the Democrats' trifecta. What are the most important races to watch for?
Yeah, I think some of the trends that Mike was just discussing really trickle down into these state house seats. And I think one big county to look at is Oakland, as Mike was saying. And that would be areas where if Harris is able to run up those numbers and continue making that county more Democratic, there are a couple of vulnerable Republican representatives in northern Oakland County that Democrats have been spending tons of money to try and flip. So there are some opportunities. There is a path for Democrats to keep it. There's another seat currently held by a Republican in Jackson. Kathy Schmaltz has a pretty stiff challenge from a Democratic contender in that area in a 50-50 district. So there is a path there for Democrats to keep it potentially. That said, they have a lot of vulnerable incumbents who are defending some very, very close races. Jamie Church's downriver is the one that everybody's been watching. That's the most expensive state house race this cycle. Millions of dollars has been spent to try to keep that district in Democratic control. In Macomb County, Representative Nate Shannon is facing a pretty stiff challenge, in part because of some of those demographic trends towards Republicans in Macomb County. That's an area that Trump has been very successful in, and with him on the top of the ticket, Nate Shannon could be in trouble, although he has won that region several times in the past. Another one that I should point out as well is in Southwest Michigan, where Representative Jim Hadsma is similarly representing a district that Trump has done well in before. And up north, we've got one race in Traverse City and another in Marquette area where vulnerable Democrats are also defending their seats. So it's really all up in play all over the state. We'll be watching very, very competitive state house districts here.
For sure. Lauren, we had some specific voter mechanics question. One reader wanted to know, how often are ballots collected from dropboxes?
Yeah, so the requirement in Michigan is 35 days before the election. They have to be checked at least once a day. There's a lot of specifics on who can check those and who can remove ballots from the Dropbox. They have to be a local election official who is authorized to do that, and they have to be transported in very specific election containers, really trying to make sure there's a chain to get the ballots in the right place from these drop boxes. So they have been being checked at least once a day in every single region where drop boxes are. And then also important to note that if you are planning to drop off your absentee ballot still, you must do that before polls close at 8 p.m. on election day, because that is the last chance for, one, in-person voters, and two, also absentee drop box collection.
And just to be clear, Lauren, if I'm still holding on to my absentee ballot, should I put it in my mailbox?
You absolutely should not put it in your mailbox at this point. So you have the Dropbox option. You can also take it directly to City Hall, where they will either have a Dropbox or they will have, they may be able to collect it from you there as well. But like, do not put it in the mail at this point. It will not get to the correct place in time. And Michigan law states that it must be in election officials' hands by 8 p.m.
Thanks for that. Simon, a reader wanted to know, is there a way for them to check with their local elections clerk if their vote was counted correctly?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the most important thing you want to make sure that you can check is that your vote was counted at all, especially if you're mail-in voting. And you can do this pretty easily now. You can go into the state's website, the Michigan Voter Information Center, submit some of your personal information, and then you can see whether or not your ballot's been received. And that should have a date, timestamp on it showing that it has been received. The easiest way to make sure that's done for sure is ensure that it's in a ballot drop box or the clerk's office, as Lauren was saying. But that said, there's no straightforward or easy way to ensure and look up your own voter record. And this in large part is because election officials want to make sure that your voter history and who you voted for is protected information that's hard for folks to track down. That said, tabulators are highly accurate machines. And if you're filling out your ballot correctly and you're bubbling in those things the right way with the right implement, then it's highly, highly unlikely that your vote would not be counted correctly. If your bubbling is not so good, the machine will often notify election workers that it's not able to tabulate a ballot correctly, and that means that it can be reviewed by hand to make sure that the correct vote is being counted there. If all else fails, you make sure that you hang on to your ballot number and ensure on your ballot stub, and ensure that then you could file a Freedom of Information Act request and essentially submit a public records request with election officials to try to get a copy of your own ballot to see who you voted for.
Okay, so sort of a series of steps we can take to find out more info if we're so curious. Mike, we had a reader who wanted to know about what information the state is sharing about voting and elections.
It has a list of who all the voters are. They know where you live. They know what districts you're in, what school district you are in, and if anyone can submit a Freedom of Information Act request, and for $34 get a list of the qualified voter list. So that'll give you that information. It'll give you the birth year, but not the birthday. And it will. And there's another file that has the history. You can find out someone voted. You can't find out how they voted. There's another file that will, from a primary, will tell if you selected a Republican or a Democratic ballot. So that's what they have. It is freely available, and a lot of people will purchase it. A lot of political campaigns, news outlets like ours have purchased this as well. And in terms of the absentee, they're every day you can get, you can pay for a list of who has voted so far, which the campaigns do want, because they want to stop pestering people if they don't have to. Oh, Isabel already voted. I will stop sending her the 400 texts and save my money for Simon or Lauren. But so that is what is available for folks.
You read my mind. I'm getting so many texts all the time.
I'm not getting any, and I don't know why, but maybe who knows?
And then you've written about this before, the Michigan voter rules. We continue to get questions about this. Just as a reminder, Michigan's voter rules, the number is higher than the number of people who are voting age in the state. Can you just remind us real quick, why is there a mismatch in these numbers, and what safeguards exist to ensure that our elections are secure?
We've always had a few more voters than the voting age public, and that has gone back to the predecessor of the current Secretary of State. But it got substantially higher after the voters approved the basic, you've got to say no, you don't want to be registered to vote. when you apply for a driver's license and you're old enough, or you change address and you get a new driver's license. So, people who are low propensity voters, if they don't want to, they have to literally click a box that says, no, I don't want to be registered. But if they don't do that, they're going to be registered. And if they move to another place and continue not to vote there in Indiana, Ohio, or Texas, the state's not going to know that they should take them off. We have about 150,000 people a year leave the state. Corresponding number come in. It's not like a net loss of 150. So you can see how these roles can kind of expand. There's no evidence that that there's fraud going on, but the state does have more names in the system than are people old enough to vote in the state.
Thank you for that. And the Secretary of State's office last week announced that a non-citizen allegedly cast a ballot in the 2024 election despite not being allowed to vote. Under Michigan's ballot secrecy protections, once a voter casts their ballot in person, it usually cannot be identified among other ballots or retrieved or canceled later. If this person hadn't come forward, Simon, is there a mechanism that would have caught this?
It's a sort of complicated answer because on one hand, if you ask, is there a mechanism that would have caught this in the moment, before the ballot was tabulated and counted as part of the 2024 election? The answer is probably not. However, would they have been caught eventually for being a non-citizen who essentially lied, committed perjury on a voter registration application? Yes. And this is in part because this individual, this I believe, student in Ann Arbor, had used Michigan's same-day registration rules, which allow you to register to vote and then immediately vote without providing proof of citizenship. And this is something that both people who believe that our electoral system is insufficiently insecure, or even people who have spreaded baseless election conspiracy theories, have centered on as a huge issue in the system. When you talk to voting, advocates for these sorts of policies, such as Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, she notes that non-citizen voting is exceptionally rare. This almost never happens, and that there's a balancing test here. That if you don't have these same-day registration provisions and not requiring someone to bring, say, a birth certificate to a polling place in order to register to vote on election day, that if you did have that sort of requirement, then much more, eligible voters, people who could cast a ballot, would be turned away from the polls and disenfranchised at a much greater extent than we'd have instances of these non-citizens voting. And so given that the ballots are anonymized more or less once they're placed through the tabulator, that means that this individual's ballot will likely count, but it doesn't mean necessarily that they won't face consequences, and that non-citizens are able to register to vote and cast ballots indefinitely without being caught. I think election officials have made it very clear that that's not the case.
Yeah, and it's really important to note, to Simon's point, that same-day registration and voting is almost not exclusively, but very heavily concentrated in areas with large student populations. Michigan State, U of M, Wayne State. These are areas where people who are turning 18 or just turned 18 are going to the polls and usually casting their ballots for the first time. And this has been in place since 2018 initiative approved by voters. And this is the first we're hearing about a non-citizen using the system incorrectly.
Incredibly rare. Thank you for that, Lauren and Simon. And then I want to end on what readers are going to see on our website tomorrow. So, of course, right now you can see a bunch of stuff about our candidates, or about our state's candidates. But then tomorrow you're going to start to see those results come in after the polls close. Bridge, Michigan relies on the Associated Press to call races. I'm curious, how does the AP get results before the Secretary of State's office? And also, how is the AP able to call a race before all the unofficial results are in?
On how they do it, and so every county and sometimes municipalities will publish the results. Sometimes it's even partial results. The state will not release the results for, let's say, Wayne County until all of the results are in. So that will mean, we wait forever. And if it's Wayne County, we're talking, millions of, well, not millions, we're talking over 1 million votes. So it's going to take a long time. And that can make a decision on whether or not a race is over or not. The AP has stringers in every single county, and it gets the results from them as they're coming out. So before they get published, by the state, there are partial results that are available at the clerk's offices in parts of Wayne County, in Macomb, and in Oakland. Oakland County, the clerk there does a wonderful job. They will use that, and so they will get it quicker. And you'll actually see partials, right? You'll see 30% of the vote is in, 29% of the vote is in. And so that's how they do it. As for calling, I don't know how AP does it, but Simon can help you understand a little bit better on the math of how they do it. It's not an exact science, but let's just say they're a little cautious before they make those decisions.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that these calls are first and foremost a projection. And the idea is that these organizations, AP foremost among them, they produce statistical models of how many votes they think are out there in terms of how many are counted. And then also they have historical baselines of what they think the partisan alignment in a given community is. So when they look at the different communities that have votes outstanding, they can sort of develop an estimation of where they think the distribution of those votes will lie on a partisan basis and how many there are left out there. And then from there, by looking at the portion of votes that have been counted and the portion that have not, they can look at maybe there's this many Democratic votes left or this many Republican votes left in, either a given congressional district or the state as a whole. And that does that or does that not then leave a reasonable chance for a candidate to overcome the margin of victory that their opponent may have at a given time with partial results available. And if they determine quantitatively that can't happen, then they feel more and more confident and able to issue a race call. And once they get to above a particularly high level of confidence that this is that the person who's leading in partial results has an unsurmountable margin of victory based on the outstanding votes that are out there, then you're going to see those calls be made. But the secret sauce, the math behind that is relatively complex and not worth talking about on this call.
Well, I want to give an example about AP and why we can trust it. They have their own personal expertise. They know these states that they're covering. I was in Ohio. Well, I still am. I was in Ohio in 2004, and the projections were that John Kerry was going to win. And someone I knew who was an AP person looked at the granular numbers from the southwest part of the state, and he said, "Hold on, don't call it. These are abnormal." And it turned out that the proposal to I think it was in gay marriage had really brought out the evangelical vote, and it turned out it flipped the state. So the state went for George Bush by 60,000 votes. So the numbers looked like it was going to be a John Kerry victory, but the expertise of someone on the ground said, "Wait a minute, there's something wrong here." So I like the fact that it's science, but I also like that these people know what they're talking about and they know the intricacies of these states.
And that's a really good point, because it's not just the historical baselines that we see, especially given the political era that we're in, where we're seeing big realignments of winning coalitions among different candidates. But they're also going to look at exit polls on the day of the election and see that, if the alignment of voters and the kind of turnout we're seeing from different demographic groups is changing substantially from what we've seen in the past, then they're definitely going to have to be more conservative in some of those estimations. And so we see some of that math change in real time.
Yeah, and that math and that strong reporting, we want to be very clear. Bridge, Michigan is not calling races. We're going to rely on the Associated Press for that. So it's possible that if you're watching your TV, you see your favorite news outlet maybe calling a race. Bridge, Michigan is not going to be in the business of doing that tomorrow. We've covered a lot of ground today. Trump, J.D. Vance, Tim Walz, they're all expected to be in the state today. If you're still trying to figure out who to vote for or what issues matter most to you, we have all the details of those statewide races on our website. And on Tuesday, our reporters are going to be out talking to voters at the polls. And you can look at our website for info throughout the day on the election, as well as, of course, at night when we get those results. I want to end on just like a happy note for just a second, because I know you all have put in a ton of work over the last several months. Mike, Simon, Lauren, what's going to be your election night snack of choice? Simon, go first.
Oh, man, I'm probably going to eat so unhealthily. So much pizza, so much candy, a lot of leftover Halloween candy. Didn't have enough trick-or-treaters to surmount my cash this year, so it's going to be real bad. Okay.
Lauren?
Yeah, I would second the Halloween candy. I'm definitely a fan of peanut butter cups. Eat a lot of peanut butter cups. But yeah, the election night pizza is a tried and true tradition. I've occasionally strayed from that, though. Election night Chinese food is also pretty good, but I think we're probably going to do pizza.
Nice. Mike?
I haven't really thought about it, but my go-to typically is going to be the big box of double bags of Cheez-Its from Costco. But, who knows?
Awesome. Well, if you want to enjoy a post-election meal with us, we're going to have a special lunch break / elections FAQ meeting on Wednesday. That's going to be at noon. We'll break down all the information we have. We'll eat some snacks. We'll talk about the election. We'll all be there. We're so honored that you spent part of your morning talking to us, asking questions about the election. Thank you to our reporters for all the reporting you've been doing over the last few weeks and months. And we'll see you at noon on Wednesday. Thank you.